Chris Taylor. Chris is coming to us from Ottawa, and that's in Canada. I'm trying to find my notes here, and it's behind something here. He's been active in community groups for over 40 years. I'm not going to read his whole bio because it's long, and hopefully you read it in either the announcements uh, through email or in the monitor. He's been active, as I said, in groups for over 40 years. Uh, he's given over 500 presentations at the Ottawa Public Library. He's written articles for Glasswire's Cybersecurity News, and he's currently the president of the Ottawa PC Users Group. So with that, I will stop my share. Whoops, let's see. There we go. I'll turn it over to Chris, and he can share his screen and do his presentation. Everybody give him a big welcome. Welcome, Chris, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much. Okay, I pasted it into the chat where you can pick up the PDF of the deck that I'm presenting tonight, and I highly recommend that people do pick it up because I'm only given an hour here or a little less than an hour for the presentation. This is normally an hour and a half, so I've moved a lot of the material into the PDF file. So not only the ability to review the content, but there's additional content there that I won't be presenting this evening. So tonight's presentation, thank you very much for inviting me, by the way. So tonight's presentation is Fun with Fonts, and I find typography to be a fascinating topic. Just to highlight just how important fonts can be, if you take a look at this for a few seconds and you think about the emotion that this invokes in you and you know how you feel about this particular message, and then you compare the exact same message just in a different typeface, and I think you'll agree that you get a little bit of a different feeling about what the message is being conveyed. So fonts can have a big dramatic impact on the message that you're trying to convey. So just as a purist note, I think that most people should be interested if they in typography, if they want people to read their text, and presumably if you're writing, that you do want people to read it. I do have some stuff in some of the slides that I think is quite fascinating stuff, but really is only of interest to real purists, and those slides will be noted with a green splat. Some style notes for the presentation. Any text you see in blue will be an example of a specific typeface that I'm trying to talk about particular parameters about it. And usually I'll have the name of the typeface in parentheses underneath the example text. I use hand gloves as sample text. Typographers use this quite regularly. It's a short word that highlights a lot of the characteristics of any given typeface. And you see an example here of the word hand gloves in the Univers typeface. For some places, I have blocks of text that I don't want you so much to read the words of it. What I want you to do is actually look at the flavor or the appearance of the block of text as a whole. And for those, I use the lorem text, and you can get that in Microsoft Word by just typing equals lorem, open and close parentheses, and press enter. And you can also get it in LibreOffice Writer if you're looking to have a block of text that you really don't want people to read the actual words. You just want to show what it looks like. Most of the typefaces that are in the presentation tonight are in Windows 10 and 11. There are a few that have specific characteristics that I couldn't find a font in Windows 10 or 11 that demonstrated that, and so there are some cases where I use other fonts, but I tried to stick as much as possible to Windows fonts that are available. The base typeface for my presentation is Book Antiqua, which is a Windows font. And the Fun with Fonts on the opening slide is Kamigata, and that's available for free at defont.com. And that's one of the nicer handwriting fonts that I've come across and available for free. So Merriam-Webster defines typography as the style, arrangement, or appearance of typeset matter. And I found that to be a little bit lacking. I actually like this one from Wikipedia an awful lot better. The art and technique of arranging type to make the written language legible, readable, and appealing when displayed. And I think that legible, readable, and appealing is really, really important. Typomania is defined as an obsession with typography. And Eric Speakerman, who is a type designer, he says, typomania is a sickness that is incurable but not lethal. I tend to agree with that. Another type designer, Matthew Carter, he's designed a lot of the typefaces that are used in Windows. He says the type is a beautiful group of letters, not a group of beautiful letters. It's not the individual glyphs or the characters within a font that should be beautiful. It's when you group them together. So letters assembled into a word, a sentence, a paragraph, or a page become type. So why care about typography? So I think it's mostly about clarity. So clarity makes it easier to read text information. And clarity actually comes from two sources. So it comes from legibility, how easily you can distinguish one letter from another letter in a block of text, and readability, which is how easily words, sentences, and blocks of text can be read rather than the individual letters. Some other reasons we might be concerned about looking at typography is when you want to capture attention, such as with Cooper Black, which is a rather dramatic example, or convey an emotion. And Edwardian script ITC is an example where it really brings out a certain emotion. Typefaces are the glyphs, so those are the individual elements within a typefaces, the letters, numbers, punctuations, and so forth that share a common design. And we have here 4 examples: Barlow, Goody Old Style, Skeena, and Bell MT. And each of them has a little bit different flavors to it, and they're more useful in one circumstance versus another, perhaps. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think as you go through the presentation, you'll see how you start to see these differences in the different typefaces, how they affect readability, legibility, the emotion that it is evoked when you use a particular typeface. A typeface family is when you take a given typeface and then you define different styles for it. And the 3 styles are the weight, the slant, and the width. And if you don't define it, for weight, it's normally considered regular. Slant will be Roman or upright, and width will be regular. And there's no perfectly set thing where you'll have the other characteristics or the other styles named. These are common names for it, but they're not always available in every typeface. And there may be additional ones that are used in different typefaces. So at the bottom, we see Barlow, and that would be, because we're not defining anything else, it's regular weight. Slant is Roman, so it's upright, and the width is regular. Or you could define some other the characteristics for it. So condensed and light, or semi-condensed, extra bold, italic. All of those can be strung together to affect how the particular typeface is used. So when you get to a font, it's the glyphs from one typeface, one style, at one size. So we have things like Franklin Gothic is the typeface, heavy is the style, and then 36 point is the size. Or going down to Bodoni MT is the typeface, condensed bold italic is the style, and then 48 point is the size. Now, that's sort of pedantic. For the non-pedantic, a typeface is a font. A typeface in a given style is a font. Typeface in a given style and a specific size is a font. Don't fall into the trap of somebody saying, "Oh, I'm going to use Arial," and you say Arial font, and you say, "Well, that's not a font because you haven't defined the size of it. And you haven't defined the style of it." People just will call any of those a font. So Gabriola is a font. Garamond Italic is a font. Franklin Gothic Medium Condensed Italic 32 point is a font. They're all fonts. Then we start looking at the typeface categories. So I'm not going into all of the categories that are normally defined. I'm going into the more common ones that you're likely to come across. There are quite a few additional categories that have been defined over the years, but for most people, I think the ones I'm going to show you here will suffice. So serif is when you have those little horizontal flicks on the ends of certain letters. Sans serif just doesn't have those extensions onto the ends of certain letters. So hand gloves text there in the univers is a sans serif typeface. You can have slab serif, which is basically a serif typeface, but the little extensions on the end are very pronounced. So they're in the same weight as the rest of the letter, and Rockwell is an example of that. Script or handwriting is just when you have something that looks like it's been written by hand, and freestyle script is an example of that. I put up display and decorative at the same time because they're both used fairly interchangeably. So they tend to be used for very large things like signage and things like that. Something where you really want it to be able to stand out or be readable at a long distance and that sort of thing. Monospaced, very few monospaced typefaces around anymore, but they are where every glyph is the same width. And then you have symbol typefaces where they're the wacky characters and things like that, like wingdings, where you can just have all these special characters that you can use for whatever purpose. Let's look at sans serif versus serif. So a serif was originally designed to make text easier to read. It helps guide the eye along the line. It's becoming, I think, a little bit less necessary for that particular purpose. Serif fonts are certainly still out there, and they can be used aiming for that purpose, but I think you'll find more and more that people are going to be using sans serif fonts where they may have used serif fonts in the past. So sans serif fonts that don't have those extensions on the ends of certain letters, they stand out more, they are starker, and they are especially used in larger or shorter blocks of text or lines of text, maybe just subheads and things like that. By the way, that what you see on the end of there, that's not a serif on the lowercase g, that's called an I. So let's look at the anatomy of type, so the parts of the glyphs. And these will all sort of come together as I go through. I'm going through an awful lot of terminology and so forth, so that as we get into describing things more in detail later on, you'll be able to relate them to certain fonts having certain characteristics about them. So the serifs in this case are shown in red, where they're those extensions onto the letters. The ascender is parts of lowercase letters that extend above a lowercase x. A descender is parts of lowercase letters that extend below the baseline. Counters are the open spaces within letters. And apertures, when you have counters, some of the counters will have openings to the outside world, and that is termed the aperture. And you can have narrow apertures and wide apertures. You can have wide counters, narrow counters. You can have extenders that are very high and descenders that go way down. All those sort of differences will appear in different typefaces. For the dimensions, you have the baseline, which is where the letters sit on. You have the x height, which is the height above the baseline of a lowercase x. You can have a cap height, which is the height of the capital letter above the baseline. And you can note over on the letter H that sometimes you'll have lowercase letters where the extension on it extends above the cap height. The ascender height is just the height of the lowercase letters above the baseline. You have a descender height, which is how much it extends below the baseline. And then you have leading, which is the space between subsequent baselines. If we look at X height, this can actually affect the characteristics of typefaces quite dramatically. And we have here goody old style being about 0.6. The height of the lowercase x is about 0.6 the cap height, going all the way to the other end of Antonio, which is not available in Windows. It's a third-party typeface, and it's about 0.85 of the height of the x height, or sorry, of the cap height. So you see here the different flavors of those goody old style and the Antonio font as the two extremes for X height. You can see how there's an awful lot of room above the lowercase letters in goody old style, whereas you have very little room above the lowercase letters in Antonio. And that can affect readability and some other things like that. So many of the so-called normal typefaces will have an X height close to about 0.7. So things like Times New Roman, Arial, Cambria, they have X heights around 0.7. So how does this affect things? Well, if you have a small X height, and if you have small fonts in particular, the lowercase letters will feel more cramped because they are shorter compared to the cap height. But you get a more airy feeling overall because you have that additional space above the lowercase letters. And there we see Goody Old Style as an example of that, where you have a fair amount of space above the lowercase letters. A large hex height, like Antonio, for small letters, you can have the space within the letters can be more legible because you actually have more space in there because you've made the lowercase letters bigger. They're higher. But as the ascenders get smaller, then it can cause readability issues, and we'll see that in a second. If you are mixing faces where you've got a project and say you're having subheads different from the body text of a particular document or so forth, if you're mixing faces, if you have a similar X height, it can create a sense of harmony in your document. So consider that if you're mixing multiple typefaces. So how do ascenders affect readability on a document? I'm going to show you a couple of lines of text, and just as quickly as you can, try to read the words that you see on the screen. Okay? Compare that to how easily you can actually pick up what the following is. I think most people find that this version is an awful lot easier to read than the other version. And that's because we get an awful lot of information from the ascenders and the dots over the I's and things like that, that is not available when you just see the bottom of the letters. So it's the ascenders can actually really affect readability. And that's why having a large X height can actually affect readability on a negative side, because you have less of that distance between the lowercase letters and the ascenders and the uppercase letters. Counters, so that space that is within letters like the O and the D and G and things like that. Closed counters, such as with Onyx, can be really difficult to read. They do give a very compact appearance to the typeface. If you ever want to write text where you have boilerplate at the bottom that you don't want people to read the cautions and the caveats and so forth, set it out with something with really close counters and they'll find it really hard to read your disclaimers. You can have very open counters. They tend to be much more readable. Corbel is an example of typeface which has very open counters, and even when you go down to very small sizes, you'll find that they are very readable. Strokes are the actual width of the ink or whatever that is getting laid down on the paper. And the strokes can either be stressed, where you have uneven widths of parts of the characters. And you can actually have, stressing can have a diagonal to it. So you can see the letter O has a diagonal slant to it, or it can be upright. And stressed typefaces, the original meaning behind, or the method behind it, was that they were trying to mimic calligraphy. You can also have unstressed typefaces where it's very even strokes, where there's if you look at the difference on the capital H between the stressed version in Goody Old Style versus the unstressed in Barlow. You can see in Barlow, it's very, very even. It doesn't have to be identical, but it's quite even width of the strokes, regardless of what part of what letter is being put down on paper. So they are easier to read, especially at all sizes. And they are really useful when it comes down to you really, really care about legibility versus character. And we'll see that in some examples coming up. The slant of letters can be italic, where you have the angled glyphs actually have different characteristics from the Roman version. So you can see how a lowercase a of the italic is a single story letter, whereas it's a two-story letter when you have the upright or Roman version of the letter. And the letters that I've used as examples here are the ones that commonly have a considerably different flavor to the italic version of the letter. You can also have obliques where they actually share the characteristics of the Roman version. It's just like you push them over sideways. So you can see in this case, the lowercase a, both of them are a two-story version of a letter. Now, any typeface that they actually have obliques rather than italics, they are commonly referred to as being italics anyways. So you call this Arial italic, even though it's truly an oblique as opposed to being a true italic. In numbers, you can have a number of variances here, which are very interesting, I find, to make things readable in different parts of a particular document. So you can have lining figures where all of the numbers have a uniform height, and they are very good in tables. So Book Antiqua is an example of one where the numbers are lining figures. You can have old style figures where you have ascenders on the 6 and the 8 and descenders on the 3, 4, 5, 7, and 9. And it's always those numbers that have the ascenders or the descenders. And they tend to be really nice in running text. And Candera is an example of a typeface that has old style figures. So here we have an example of running text. And if you have lining figures, you can see how it's not quite as elegant as the numbers that you see when you use old style figures, like in the lower example of Candera. It just looks better in the old style figures than it does in the lining figures. On the other hand, if you have a table of numbers, you'll find that lining figures tend to be more readable, and they're more used when you have tables of numbers, whereas using old style figures in a table of numbers tends not to be as useful. Then you have the spacing for figures, and you can have either tabular, where it has a uniform width, like in Gil Sans, or you can have proportional, where there's a non-uniform width, such as Bandschrift. And that's the way it looks in running text, but in a table of figures, it's actually the opposite. So tabular figures look better when you have a table of numbers, because the numbers all line up and make it easy for you to compare numbers through a column of numbers. If you have proportional figures, such as Bandschrift, that just looks odd. This looks like it's a smaller number, 9,211,161 versus 2,897,328, just because of that width of the numbers. So again, when you get to using a table of numbers, you're better off with tabular versus using proportional. Now in OpenType, some OpenType typefaces will support mixing and matching them. So you can have tabular or proportional, lining or old style, and you can go in and you can block out certain parts of your text passages that you have. If it's a table of numbers, you can decide, okay, well, a table of numbers, it looks best if it is, tabular and lining, or lining and tabular. So you can go in and you can pick it up. So a table of figures in Calibri, you can actually go in and select tabular lining. If you have running text, you're still in Calibri, you can actually have a proportional old style, and it looks better there. The default for Calibri, by the way, if you don't choose anything else, will be tabular lining. So good for a table of numbers, not as good if you have running text. Talking about OpenType, TrueType was actually developed by Apple and Microsoft in the early 80s. OpenType was developed by Adobe and Microsoft in the late 90s. And the OpenType actually supports a lot more advanced features, such as small caps, alternative characters. We'll take a look at those. Stylistic sets, we'll look at those. True fractions. So rather than 1/2, you'll have a single glyph that is the 1/2 symbol. Ligatures, which is combining multiple characters together, contextual alternatives, all kinds of things that can be in OpenType that is not supported in TrueType. So designers always will want to use OpenType. You and me or anybody, why not use OpenType? There's no downside to using OpenType. So if I ever have a choice when I'm obtaining a typeface and it's available as either OpenType or TrueType, I'll always choose the OpenType. It may have additional features that are not available in the TrueType. This I found fascinating, the anatomy of typeface. So font size, 72 points to the inch is how it's defined, but that's sort of. It's not actually the height of the glyphs when you talk about a certain number of points. It's the height of the original lead molds that were used to create the fonts. It is always a few points bigger than the distance between the ascender and the descender, so it avoids collisions between characters on multiple lines of text. And this is what I found really fascinating. Type designers are free to define points any way they choose, and they do. Here's some examples of Perpetua, Franklin Gothic book, Arial, and Placard. And I drew line across on the cap height for each of those different typefaces. All four of those were set at 96 points. So you can see there's considerable difference in the heights of those particular typefaces just because that's the way the type designer designed them. This I found a really good quote from a website online. There's no universally valid basis for body height usage and the font size this ultimately delivers. And we'll see in a minute how that can really affect things. When you have scripts or handwriting typefaces, the sizes can be even more dramatic. So this is Santa Catalina and Get Show. Both of those were set at 96 points. Big difference in the size of those. And Santa Catalina in particular is best laid out in single lines that you can move around on a page or whatever, but not multiple lines of text, because you will have crashes between the ascenders and the descenders when you have multiple lines of text. Both of those typefaces are available for free at defont.com if you want them. Character width can actually be considerably different as well. These are all set to the same point size, but you can see that there's considerable differences in the widths of the entire lowercase and uppercase letters. And one of the things I found interesting is comparing Callisto MT and Georgia. In the lowercase, Georgia is actually wider, whereas in the uppercase, Callisto is wider. So just how the designer decided to design their particular typeface. And you'll see different characteristics in individual glyphs. The Q in both Callisto MT and Book Antiqua are really quite elegant. But you'll see differences in all kinds of places, such as Book Antiqua, capital J actually has a descender on it. You can see that the width of the glyph for the capital C in Book Antiqua is considerably wider than Georgia, even though the entire width of A through Z is about the same. Leading is the line spacing between multiple lines of text, and you can increase leading to help with readability if you have very long lines, or you have compact typefaces, or you have large X height typefaces. So any of those characteristics might lead you to increase leading. You might not have noticed on the first example at the top, when I go for the two red words at the right hand side and then I cross back to the left hand side margin, I've actually skipped a line. And it's a little bit hard to tell that I skipped a line in the compact text on there where the leading is not expanded. Where I expand the leading, it makes it a little bit more obvious how I actually skipped a line going from the two words on the right going over back to the left hand margin. So leading can increase readability. Tracking is when you adjust the spaces between all the letters, and you can avoid these big gaps in words. It really affects things when you have right justified text, and it has to spread out words out to the right hand margin, and then it has to make up that space somewhere. And so tracking will allow you to adjust all the spaces rather than just the spaces between the words. Kerning is where you adjust spaces between certain letter pairs. And what they're trying to do is make the volume of space between those letters to be more similar. And so here we see an example of Arial. And in all the cases I have here, the green is the end of the first letter and the red is the start of the second letter. And you can see N and M, they can't overlap, so there is space between them. But when you have T and O, you can actually tuck the O underneath the capital T, and the lowercase o actually starts before the end of the uppercase T. Roboto is an interesting font for an example here, because in no case do you have the second letter actually start before the end of the first letter. There is kerning, so they are adjusting the space, but they're not kerning it as aggressively. This is the first example I have of a purpose-built font. Roboto was actually designed by Google for use in Android phones. What is a characteristic of an Android phone? Well, all phones, they're small screens, small fonts. And so if they kerned it more aggressively, it would make it harder to read the letters, harder to distinguish things because they would tend to blend together more. So they kern it to have it a little bit more pleasing, but they don't kern it as aggressively as something like Arial. Okay, so now let's get into actually looking at how do we choose a typeface. So considerations that you should think about when you're picking out a typeface to use for any type project. If you can find out what the original design intent or criteria were, it's a good idea because you can maybe then say, okay, this fits my project or it doesn't fit my project, and you might be able to make a decision based on that alone. You want to look at clarity, that legibility and readability for your particular use of it, and make sure that people who are going to be trying to read your text can do so comfortably. Then look at the effect or the emotion of a particular typeface. Is it bold, casual, formal, fun? Something that you choose for advertising a kid's birthday party is probably going to be something a little bit more casual than you would choose for a financial report for a corporation or something like that. What is the intended use of the particular typeface? Now, if you have different typefaces for the headings and the body, don't make them too similar. And I have some examples later on dealing with that. If you have them too similar, it makes it hard for people. They get confused as to what is a heading and what's a body, especially if your headings start to get a little bit on the long side. Don't mix too many faces in one project. One or two faces is usually the best thing to go with. Let's look at some purpose-built typefaces and what the design criteria were for them. Times New Roman was designed for the Times of London in 1931. And at the time that it was designed, the Times printed on better quality paper than other newspapers of the day. And what that allowed them to do was design a typeface that had very sharp serifs, stressed letter forms, and it made it more elegant. So it looked better on that high quality paper. It is horizontally very compact, which makes sense because newspapers have narrow columns. It is one of the most overused typefaces out there. Why? Because it was used as the default font in Microsoft Windows for many, many years. And so people who brought up Word and just started typing, they were typing in Times New Roman. Matthew Butterick, type designer, says Times New Roman is not so much a font choice as an absence of font choice. Frutiger was designed for the Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. And it was for directional signage in 1970. This design criteria was considerably different than Times New Roman. They wanted legibility at various angles, sizes, and distances. They wanted to be able to have it that you could look down a concourse at something that is a quarter mile away and still make out what the gate signage is and directional signage is and things like that. The ascenders and the descenders are very prominent in it, very wide apertures, very easy to distinguish different letters. The designer said what was important was total clarity. I'd even call it nudity and absence of any kind of artistic addition. Some type designers are looking for artistically pleasing shapes to their letters. Frutiger was not looking for that. They didn't want artistic beauty in their signage. They wanted legible signs. It is very popular for other uses, corporate and transportation branding in particular, and it is currently the best-selling linotype typeface that's out there for all kinds of purposes. Transport was created in 1957 for the United Kingdom Department of Transport for road signage. Part of the design criteria, they wanted very open counters, and they wanted letter spaced, which means spreading out the letters a little bit, yet retaining the word shape. And this helped for being able to distinguish the letters at great distances. The open counters helped to offset the effect of halation. And you can see halation in the two versions of Expressway. The bottom one has a great deal of halation. The top one has less so. So it's easier to tell what the individual letters are in the top one because the halation is lower. So that's when you get that glare of the car headlights on a sign, and they were trying to offset that. Only good for road signs? Well, not really. It's used exclusively on the government of the UK website. They use transport typeface for the whole thing. You can download Transport for free from the UK government if you want to use it. Pavement is a vertically stretched version of Transport Medium. And we've all seen this on the roadways. So you see these signs for speed limits or danger or various things that they want to just lay out on the road. And they vertically stretch it because you are seeing it at that angle. And there's only 74 glyphs in the entire font in this case, the uppercase and lowercase letters, the ampersand, and the numbers. You can download Pavement for free from the UK government if you want to use it. Bell Centennial was designed by Matthew Carter for AT&T for phone books. Design criteria for that, considerably different than the other ones we looked at. They wanted more characters per line without losing legibility at very small point sizes, as you see in phone books. And they wanted to reduce the effects of ink spread on poor quality paper because phone books are never printed on high quality paper. They are printed on really cheap stuff where the ink tends to bleed. Here's how Bell Centennial looks if you blow it up really big. And it looks kind of weird with those little indents that go into various parts of, mostly on the interiors of the letters. They're called ink traps. And what they're designed to do is allow the ink to flow into that so that it fills up that part rather than affecting the legibility of the whole letter. Here's an example of an actual printed Bell Centennial, and you can see how the ink traps, like there, have actually filled in, but it meant that it didn't fill in the ink down here where it was important that it not actually fill in that part of the letter. Only useful in tiny sizes, cheap paper? Well, no. Just because the design criteria was for one purpose doesn't mean it can only be used for that. It's very good to know that that's why they designed the typeface the way they did. But in this case, Mazda in the UK used it for huge signage, billboards for their ads. The National Opera in England used it to advertise a production. So you can mix and match. Just it's a good idea to know what the design criteria was. Retina was designed in 2000 for the Wall Street Journal, and it was specifically for the stock pages. And so the design criteria for that, they wanted legible at very small point sizes, and so they wanted ink traps to help offset that bleeding of the ink. And they wanted equal width despite different weights, so that when you had a column of stock listings, if you had some of them in bold and some of them not in bold, the numbers still lined up. And this is the way it would actually look. So you have everything from thin to very bold, and they are all exactly the same width. It was updated in 2016, hinted for on-screen viewing, as more and more people are looking at things like stock listings or whatever on computer screens. So it was designed to align with the pixel grid on a computer monitor. So cross purposes. So if you look at Times New Roman, it was designed for tight text, narrow columns. Does that mean you can't use it for page width body text? Frutiger and Transport were designed for big signs. So does that mean you can't use them for subheads in a book? Of course you can. Just be aware of why it was originally designed the way it was designed, what it was optimized for, and see whether that fits your particular use. Retina was designed for columns of tiny numbers so that, can I not use it for body text? Pavement was designed for road lettering viewed at an angle. So does that mean I can't use it to caption an illustration? Well, in both those cases, probably not the best choices. In particular, Retina, because it'll set you back US $900 for the complete family of 72 fonts. So you'd have to think twice about whether you really want to use Retina for a project. Okay, let's look at some other interesting things. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about Comic Sans. So copper meeting room door, somebody posted a sign, said, please keep the door closed, thank you. Somebody else came along and added a sign saying, please don't use Comic Sans. We're a Fortune 500 company, not a lemonade stand. There's a real hate or love relationship with Comic Sans. And there's places like this, boycott Comic Sans today. Every time you use Comic Sans, Faye will punch this adorable little bunny. And using Comic Sans is like turning up to a black tie event in a clown costume. And you even have jokes. Comic Sans walks into a bar. The bartender says, we don't serve your type. Vincent Conner was the gentleman who designed Comic Sans, and he worked for Microsoft at the time. He was on another project, uh, but I'll show you where he designed it for. But he said, if you love Comic Sans, you don't know much about typography. But he went on to say, if you hate it, you really don't know much about typography either, and you should get another hobby. How did it come about? Microsoft Bob. Some people may recognize Microsoft Bob from back in the, I guess, late 80s, early 90s. And it was a room metaphor. So you could go, and if you wanted to write a letter, you'd click here and it would bring up a word processor. You want to do your finances, you could click there, bring up a spreadsheet. You click on the calendar, bring up your calendar, things like that. And because it was a new metaphor, what they decided to do was have this little dog that would guide people through it. And it was Rover Retriever. And it came up and it was saying, my name is this and I can help you out. Vincent Conner looked at that and he said, dogs don't talk in Times New Roman. And all of the dialog boxes for Rover Retriever were all set in Times New Roman. So Vincent Conner set out to design Comic Sans. Now, the program itself, Microsoft Bob, died a quick death before they actually managed to get Comic Sans into the program, but it did live on as an optional font within the Windows environment. So if we look back at that statement, using Comic Sans is like turning up to a black tie event in a clown costume. Maybe using Times New Roman is like turning up at the circus in black tie. Think about appropriate use for typefaces. Here's some things that maybe not appropriate uses of Comic Sans. On a defibrillator. Yeah, maybe that's a little bit too serious a thing to be using a typeface like Comic Sans. Somebody actually created a book for Pope Benedict, and the entire book was set in Comic Sans. I Can't Breathe. Again, maybe something a little bit too serious a topic to use something as casual as Comic Sans. Or the Surrey Police. If you've been the subject of a rape or serious sexual assault, maybe it's a little bit too casual for that message. Or how about CERN, the particle physics people in Europe? And they came out and they said they were going to switch entirely to Comic Sans for all of their communication channels going forward. Fortunately, that was on April 1st of 2014. They never actually did intend to or follow through on actually using Comic Sans for all their communications. Let's look at some display typefaces. The choice of the typeface when you're looking at display typefaces for big signage and things like that, it really has a dramatic effect. So something like Goody Stout, very, very dramatic, the effect that actually has. But in body text, you still have that effect. It's just a little bit more subtle. So here we have Candera versus Montserrat. And Candera is just a little bit more relaxed than Montserrat. Montserrat is a little bit more formal. If we compare some of the individual glyphs, lowercase t, you can see there's more curvature to it. The slice at the top of the T in Candera is at an angle slightly. The P, you have the upright is a little bit curved to it. The O is shaped a little bit differently. The M in Candera has splayed M, so there's an angle out of the uprights. Let's look at some other characteristics or feelings that you can get from particular typefaces. Look and see which you think maybe is more appropriate. So say you have Canadian Finance, a company or a newsletter or something like that. Which would be more appropriate for it, Castellar or Verdana? Not necessarily either being wrong, but somehow I get the feeling that Castellar just fits that vibe of finance company a little bit better. How about Colonial Furniture? You have a store, Colonial Furniture. Is it better in Chiller or Old English? We go so far as to say, yeah, pretty plain that Old English would be much better than Chiller. Sally's Lemonade Stand, Impact or Andy or Comic Sans. I think for Sally's Lemonade Stand, Andy or Comic Sans or something like that might be more appropriate. Or how about the Lava Lamp Shop, Retrophile versus Perpetua? Retrophile just has that 80s head shop sort of feel to it. or a poetry tea house, Lucida handwriting, or note de sens. Not that note de sens is wrong, but somehow a tea house, something like Lucida handwriting, just seems to fit the vibe a little bit better. This one's interesting. If you have Foothills Bar and Grill as a business, would Magneto be better or Western? I would go so far as to say that it depends on the audience that you're trying, or the clientele you're trying to attract. If you're trying to attract people in their 20s and things like that, maybe the Magneto will be more appropriate. If you're trying to attract clientele that is into their 50s, 60s, and above, maybe Western would actually be more appropriate. Let's look at some other signage usage that you have. So stop sign. Everybody's seen lots and lots of stop signs. So here we have it set with in Garamond. And you can see it just doesn't look quite right. And Forte looks even worse. Penna, we're getting in the more, the right direction, but it's kind of thin. Or Century Gothic. Now that's looking a lot better. Or how about Highway Gothic? And that is used throughout most of North America for street signage. And you can see how it's just more appropriate. You don't have to have something that looks elegant. You want people to be able to read that at a distance, know what it says without any question. Word marks are a lot of fun. So here we have Good Foods. What they did was they replaced the fruit for the vowels, and that was set in Avenir Black. Sofa World, now this is my interpretation, but I think it's probably pretty accurate. They use Frutiger Black and Garamond Italic. So to me, what that conveys is sturdy but comfortable. Kind of neat that they blended those two together to give that sort of feeling to it. Intact Insurance, Bodoni, so it portrays a certain amount of elegance to it, but it's protected by heavy square brackets. Not a bad feeling for an insurance company. Going is an app that is used for finding cheap flights, and they made the G into an arrow, so it evokes that feeling of movement or travel. This one I thought was interesting, Tour de France. So this is the latest logo for the Tour de France, and you can see that some of the letters in it make up a person on a bicycle. This one I thought was really funny. Made for Med. It's actually a company that does, its website is all about medicine for doctors. And so it's not really for the layperson. It's all designed around physicians themselves. And their logo, they actually embrace the stereotype of illegibility of doctors writing. And that's their actual logo from their website. I thought that was clever. Zara is a clothing retailer. And this used to be their logo going back quite a few years. And then they updated it to use Linotype Did Up Pro Bold. And you can see a considerably different feel to it. And then they tightened up the letter spacing. They thinned out the strokes. They brought the A to a point. They opened up the counters. And it was really polarizing. So some of the comments on it, New Zara logo has been kerned into oblivion, kerning where they overlap letters. Worst piece of type I've seen in years was this done by one of those new robots that will replace humans. That's Eric Speakerman that I had a quote from earlier in the presentation. And somebody came up with this little logo or little cartoonish thing where they had Zara in 2011, Zara in 2019, and they figured in 2027, this is what the Zara logo is going to look like. I hope not. So when you redesign logos, it can be really polarizing. IBM, I think, has done a good job of it over the years. They've had many, many years where they've been in business. So this was their logo in 1947. In 56, they updated it, but not dramatically different. But, it did a little bit of a stylistic change, a little bit of modernization of it. Then they came up with the striped lines. And then in 1972, and this is currently their logo, they reduced the number of lines that were in it and the placing of the actual where the lines actually go. So they did, I think, a smart redesign of their logo over time. Nothing so dramatic that it would turn people off, but just modernizing the design. Metropolitan Museum of Art, this was their old logo. And from a distance, very, very simple. All you see is capital letter M on a solid black circle. As you move in closer, all of a sudden you get these elegant lines and diagonals and circles and so forth in the logo. Then they changed it to this, which is their current logo, the Met. And it was polarizing and a lot of designers hated it. New logo is typographical bus crash. Andrew Pekulik, who's an overall designer, not specifically type design, just said, "Why did you do this?" Oh, I seem to have duplicated a slide. Sorry. So Walmart just recently redesigned their logo. So this is straight off their website. They were excited to announce comprehensive brand refresh, demonstrating evolving capabilities and so forth, reflects the enduring commitment to serving customers, help Walmart build credibility and connection, become known, seen as, modern, culturally dynamic brand. This was their old logo. This is their new logo. One person said, "So you selected the text and hit Control B?" Not much difference on that design. And I certainly don't say that people shouldn't do subtle changes to it, but I don't think you should brag about the fact that you changed from that old Walmart to the new Walmart. Fine if you want to make the change. Just don't brag that you make some dramatic change, because it's not a dramatic change. Jeopardy, the TV show. I always wondered about the idea that they use all uppercase letters, and all uppercase tends to be less readable. And so I asked Perplexity AI, typographically speaking, is the typeface used on Jeopardy a poor choice? And they came back and they talked about what it was, the ITC, Corina, functional, mixed opinions, and goes back again to why it was designed the way it was designed. It was chosen for legibility on small, early TV screens. So maybe it's actually time for an update. But they say continued use reflects tradition, brand consistency, and aligning with the show's intellectual tone. So it could be that they decided to stick with it without changing to mixed case and things like that, because they figured it'd be too polarizing to actually make that change. Too many people would hate them for it. Let's talk about headings and subheadings and body text. Oh, I just noticed the time. I better move along. So you want to make sure subheadings and the headings can stand out from each other. So let's just jump to some examples of how you can make them stand out. So you could have the same typeface, but a heavier weight. Or you could have a different typeface, same size, and a heavier weight. Or you could have a different typeface, same size, different color. The aim here is just to make them stand out. Or you could go different typeface, larger size, outdented and colored. All of those can work and more. So just make sure if you are working with text and it has subheads and body text, make sure that your subheads do stand out somehow from the rest of it. Typography rules: no space after or before dashes or hyphens. Hyphens are used to join words, things like up to date, rock hard, ex-wife. An end dash, use it to separate a range. Think the word through. So 2019 through 2020. There's ways you can get it with Microsoft Word or LibreOffice Writer will do autocorrects to get you that. M dash is a break in a sentence. Think a comma or a parenthesis, such as the fee increase opposed by all went ahead, and ways that you can get that. Indents versus line spacing. First line indents and spaces between paragraphs are used for the same purpose, to set apart two paragraphs of text. So the top two are fine, either extra spacing or indents on the first line. Don't do both. Justified versus ragged text. As a general rule, if you're working in regular things like Word and so forth, generally speaking, right justified text is not good because they can't do the algorithms for spreading the text correctly. Professional typesetting, no problem, but Microsoft Word can't do a good job of it. A few more rules: one space after a period. Going back 50, 60, 100 years, they had 5, 6 spaces after a period. If you are using feet and inches, don't use smart quotes, which Microsoft Word and LibreOffice will do an autocorrect when you put in the foot or inch markings. And so that is wrong. And so the right one is actually to use the prime and double prime, which you can get through the Unicode characters. But generally acceptable is just undo the autocorrect. So as soon as it changes it to the smart quote, hit Control Z, and it'll reverse that so that it is just the upright foot or inch marker. Multiplication symbol, don't use the letter X because it follows the shape of the typeface. And you can see in this example here, because Book Antiqua has a very stylized X, it doesn't look like the multiplication figure. It actually looks like the letter X. Division, there is actually a pure division symbol, but it's not usually as big a deal. Just the slash on the keyboard works quite well. Copying and pasting text between documents. If you look at this text and you see something doesn't look quite right, and it's in the words something odd. And the reason is that the heights of the letters are different. That's the first thing that's wrong. The second thing is that the letter forms are completely different in their shaping. The reason is the blue text is Arial 11 point and the red text is Calibri 11 point. And you will get this when you cut and paste between multiple documents. So be careful if you're copying and pasting information from either another part of a document or a different document altogether. If you just paste it in, it'll carry over that formatting information. The typeface used, the size, the style, everything like that. Instead, do a paste special, unformatted text, and you will get it to follow the text that you're pasting it into. Problem with missing fonts, if you choose a typeface and you give the resulting document to somebody else who doesn't have that typeface, you're going to get a font substitute. So the solution is to embed the fonts in the document if you can. Here's an example of how it works. So here I have it's party time banner or something like that I created, and I use the typeface called Cotton Candies. I bring it up on a computer that doesn't have Cotton Candies, and this is what I got. And so it did a font substitute because it didn't have that font on it. Now, if I, as the recipient of the document, was just told, oh, please print 150 copies of this document and start posting them, I might not realize that this is not what was intended. So in this case here, Calibri was actually used as a substitute. So to embed fonts, you go to the options, and you go to the Save section, and you can choose the option Embed Fonts in File. You may or may not be able to legally do it. Some fonts will actually prevent you from embedding fonts, but if you can embed them, that'll get you around that particular problem. And here's an example where I couldn't save the document with this Snowy Christmas typeface, even though it was available for free at defont.com, but they, for some reason, had built in a license restriction saying that I couldn't embed it. Looking at the anatomy of a newsletter and how fonts can be used to help separate different elements. So this is our newsletter. It has the headings in Calibri and body text in Cambria. The columns, it's either two columns with either a 1/3, 2/3 split or even split, or 3 columns evenly split, depending on the content of the particular article. Justification is ragged right. And the logo we use for the word Ottawa, Perpetua titling MT bold italic, and Perpetua titling MT bold for the PC News. Some of the enhancements we have, the article heading, white on blue, the article lead, three-line drop cap. Subheadings are body text, or the body font, bolded. We have on the first page an index, black on blue, and the next meeting, black on blue. Most widely used font in the world, Calibri. It was designed in 2002 by Lucas de Groot for Microsoft, and it became the default for Word, Outlook, PowerPoint, and Excel. And Simon Garfield, who wrote a book on type, said, "This make it the best font, most versatile, most seductive, surprising, and beautiful." Of course not. That font is yet to come. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. There are a whole bunch of extras in the PDF file. There's a whole bunch of resources, web resources, things like that that you can go to, books that I've read on typography that I thought were particularly good, some information on how to examine all of the glyphs that are in a particular typeface, how to install and uninstall fonts, the difference between oblique and fake oblique in fonts, ligatures, which is a way of combining multiple characters together and what the effects are and how to use them properly. OpenType stylistic sets, which is a way you can have multiple character sets within a particular font that are completely different shapes of the glyphs. Going beyond Calibri, which is what Microsoft has selected a new typeface to be the default for Microsoft Office applications. It is now Aptos. And then I have a bunch of odds and sods available as well. If anybody's interested, the Ottawa PC User Group, our motto is helping users. We are open to members or non-members. You can come as many times as you want as a non-member, no problem at all. We have our main club meeting the second Wednesday of the month where we'll have a topic. On other Wednesday evenings, like tonight, we have our Q&A session, which I'm missing. And it's just an open forum. People can ask whatever they want. And we have their upcoming, which is just the bottom of our homepage. If you want to join the Auto PC User Group, it's only $20 a year, and that's Canadian, so it's like, what, $1.50 American or whatever. If you want to see why you might want to join, we have some information on there. The Ottawa Public Library, those are all in person, or most of them are in person, so they won't be of interest to you. We do have 2 member-only services. We have a discussion forum that's available only to members 24/7. People can discuss anything they want. We also have a one-on-one remote assistance where we can connect to your computer over the internet and help work through a problem. And that's available only to members. And that's all, folks. So I did run just a little bit over. I apologize for that. But I did paste that information in at the end of the chat earlier on. So by all means, pick up that PDF file if you want. It will be there at least through June of this year. But feel free to pick that up. You'll have all of the slides that I presented, as well as all that additional information, which is probably almost as many slides as I showed tonight, will be there as extras in the PDF file. So with that, I will stop my share, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Chris, what a fascinating look at typography. I've played around with a little bit. I've never gone into it as detailed as you have, and I just am fascinated by it. Drew, you have your hand up first.
Yeah, okay. Chris, everybody, if you look in the chat, I've already put the presentation up on our web server.
Oh, great.
And I put the link to it in the chat. So on our meetings page is now the presentation.
Oh, geez. Oh, heck.
And that's all.
Please don't speak if you're not muted. If you're going to say something, please unmute yourself to say it to everybody. Your hand's not up. Please wait. Steve, your hand is up next.
Yeah, hi, Chris.
Hi, Steve.
Yeah, that was quite brilliant. What was the question? I had so many questions. I having trouble keeping track of them all. Oh, have you designed your own fonts?
I have tried. There in the resources list in the additional slides, there are a number of free programs out there, and some of them even open source, that allow you to modify or design fonts from scratch. I tried a little bit. I was not successful. Almost needless to say, it's not a trivial exercise to do. There's one interesting one from Microsoft called Font Maker, where you can actually take your handwriting and turn it into a font. So that's kind of cool. And I played around a little bit with that. And if you have relatively even handwriting, you can actually fill in boxes with each of the letters, and then you scan it, and they will turn it into a font for you.
How are you identifying fonts?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Somebody hands you
oh, okay, yeah, sure.
a text and asks you what.
Yeah.
There was a friend of mine that I worked with, and he was absolutely astounding at it. He could identify anything. I mean,
Yeah.
it didn't matter
I'm
what it
yeah.
was. He could tell.
I'm not really great at that, but there is in the extra slides, there are two websites that are available, what the font and what font is, and you can
You
go
didn't
there and
have.
you can take a
Do you have
screenshot.
Have you used Identifont?
I don't
That's
believe
the
I've
first.
used that one.
Yeah, that one's
But
pretty good.
yeah, these other two I've used both of them, and they're quite good. What you do is you can do a screen capture or something like that, or a photograph or whatever scan of a font. You upload the graphic of it, and it will try to identify the font, and it does a pretty good job. So I've never I hadn't heard of Identifont, so I'll look into that to see if I can add it to my deck. That'd be great. Thanks, Steve.
One of the fonts I designed was the one that's on the pcct.org, the website for
Oh,
that.
cool!
I was the webmaster and I designed the font for it. It was
Congratulations.
yeah, it was based on another one, of course, but then I
Yeah,
modified it quite a bit.
yeah, cool.
Can I ask
Okay,
one question?
Go
I
ahead,
don't
D.
see anywhere you put up your hands here. I don't see anything for your hands to raise your
It's under
hand.
React. If you
Under
go to React,
React. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
there. I thought I had, okay. I never
All right,
seen
but
it
go
like
ahead
that.
with your question.
Okay, my question is simple. What do you consider the best font to use in everyday, like just writing a nice letter? And I know it
Yeah.
depends if the person
There-
can see well or can't see as good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that there's anything necessarily that there is a best or not. Calibri, which was the default in Microsoft Office applications, is quite a nice font. It's very readable at different point sizes and things like that. So that I think was a very serviceable font. It's a little bit more relaxed of a typeface than what is now the default, which is Aptos. So Microsoft a couple of years back commissioned 5 different fonts with the aim of declaring one of them as being the new default. And they had Bierstadt was the winner, and it got renamed to Aptos, and that is the default now. It's a very serviceable font as well. Is very legible, all point sizes and things like that. It's a little bit more of a formal font than Calibri was. So if you want something that is quite formal, Aptos is very good. If you want something that is a little bit more relaxed, I think that Calibri is not a bad choice.
When would you use Arial? Just Arial.
Arial is a little bit more on the formal side as well. So it is more along the family of where Aptos is. It is actually, some people consider it to be a complete steal of Helvetica, which is actually one of the most serviceable and most used fonts in the world. Signage and things like that. Helvetica is very, very commonly used, and some people have actually declared it to be the most perfect font that exists. So Arial is some people call it a knockoff of Helvetica. So it is a very serviceable font, a little bit more formal than Calibri, more in line with the way Aptos is.
Yeah, I tend to use Arial for most of mine because of it being more formal and more business-like to me.
Yep. Yep.
Any other questions or comments?
Another one like that was Heavenetica. That was another knockoff of
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And the one thing you have to remember, and we were talking about Microsoft Publisher earlier, any kind of a publisher program or Word or whatever, and you did mention it, Chris, is limit yourself to what, 1 or 2 fonts, and
Yeah.
that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep things simple. Don't try to boil the ocean with a dozen fonts in a document or something like that. You're just going to confuse the reader, make it difficult for them to identify different parts of your document, and yeah, it doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah, usually a good rule of thumb is to use the serifs on printed material and the sans serifs on screen.
Not a bad direction to go. I would agree with that.
Now, which one would you use if you want attention to get to it, or which one would you use for attention getter, or to
I
switch it up to make it fancy?
Yeah, I don't actually restrict myself to any particular fonts. I use probably anywhere a couple of dozen that I commonly use. And it just depends on the audience as much as anything else, whether I want something more formal or less formal, whether I want it at low point sizes versus large sizes. Low point sizes, you want to choose something that has more open counters that, won't be hard to read at small point sizes and things like that. So it really is, if you look at, as I go back to when I started with the Times New Roman, if you look at the original design criteria of that, and you can find that if you Google for, original design criteria and give it a font name, it will come up with places like under Microsoft. Microsoft has a fantastic typography section on their website, and they have the design criteria that was for a lot of the fonts that are built into Windows. Wikipedia has an awful lot of information on that. Some of the type foundries have good information on the original criteria for particular fonts, and they might help guide you for the particular use that you have, whether it is designed with that in mind or it might be actually working against you.
Chris, I'm using a program called Gamma.ai, I believe it is. It's a program that will create PowerPoint slides, and they use different fonts that are not normally in Windows, for instance, and I
Okay.
have to add them. Are they doing that for copyright purposes, or is it just to be different?
Yeah, hard to say. Probably more likely that it's to be different. They want to be able to stand out from their competition, I would think, is why they're choosing things like that. It gets really tricky because if you start using typefaces that are not on other people's computers, it can be really problematic. In the extra slides in the PDF, I point out sources of different typefaces, and one of the nicer sources out there is Google Fonts, and they have over 1,000 fonts that you can freely, like they're licensed completely open. So if you use any of the fonts there and you're giving your document to other people, you can point to them and you can say, you can either embed the font or you can point to them to Google Fonts and tell them, please download this particular font onto your computer so that you see things without a font substitute happening. Licensing in fonts, it gets really, really tricky, really, really fast. It depends on how many computers you intend it to be on. Is it for web use? Is it for publications? Is it for something that is going to be used where you're going to sort of print it and it's not editable text? It can be used differently than if it's editable text. It gets really, really tricky with font licensing.
Is there a program out there that will recognize a font in something that's already printed? Let's say you've got a sign and you need to change a couple of letters in it and you want to match the font. Is there a
Yeah.
way to do that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what we
there.
were talking about with
Yeah.
Identifont, and the other
Yeah,
one is
either Identifont or what font is or what the font. And any of them, you can take a picture of it and then upload that picture, identify what the letters are in that particular one. You only need about 4 or 5 letters for them to be able to identify the font. And then they will tell you, usually they won't come and say, oh, that's Garamond. They will say, the likelihood that it's Garamond versus this, versus this, versus this. And they typically will come up with about a half a dozen choices that it might be, and you can go and look through the individual glyphs and see which ones match the best, and then decide to go with that. So look to the PDF file for the information on identifying fonts, as well as Identifont is that Steve mentioned that I don't have in there, so I would say check that out as well.
yeah. What that one does is it asks you for the trailer and the riser and the run and all the rest of
Oh,
the shapes of the
cool.
different. Yeah,
Okay,
and
cool.
it asks you what the part is. Does it match this or does it match that and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, I'll love to take a look at that one. That sounds really comprehensive.
Okay, any other comments or questions, or we'll call it a night?
I just put the link to what the font in the chat.
Oh, great. Great.
I couldn't remember the 3 or 4 that you mentioned.
And for those who don't remember, if you open up the chat and go to the top, you'll see 3 little dots. And right at the top, when you click those 3 dots, it'll say Save Chat. Click that, and it will save the file with all of the chat comments and links. in a folder called Zoom under your
Under
documents folder.
documents, yeah.
So if you want to grab some, there's quite a bit of information in today's chat. So that I would suggest you might want to do that. And so with that, Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks for inviting me.
Who would think that fonts would make a very interesting presentation, but it does.
I've had that comment more than once where
Yeah.
people have said, I thought it was going to be kind of boring, but it was actually interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll
Okay.
see you next time.
Thanks for inviting me, folks. Have a good evening.